Thank you, Joelle. So nicely said. Okay, come on, switch.
And Mayor Roberson, the meeting has begun recording.
Yes, thank you. And then my computer decides it wants to check for updates on Adobe. Of course it does. There we go. So let's find there's our agenda. All right, well, we'll welcome everyone to our Water Demand Committee of July 7. And I don't know, customarily before I call the meeting to order, at this time, Joelle, do you outline how people can participate, or would you like me to officially open the meeting first?
Yes, Mayor Roberson, you can officially open the meeting by calling the meeting to order, and then I'll go ahead and conduct roll call.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we will call the meeting to order, and if we will have our outstanding Joelle do roll call, please.
Committee Member Riley.
Here. Here.
Committee Member Anderson. Absent. And then Chair Roberson.
Yes, I'm here.
We have a quorum of the committee.
All right, so if in case anybody gets confused between me and George with we've got our little goatees going and the haircut's the same. George is the one with glasses on, everybody.
Excellent.
Don't take them off, George, you'll get me confused. So we'll call our meeting to order. Joelle, will you now at this point share with people how they can participate, because we're going to be looking at public comments here shortly.
Will do. At this time, the public may comment on any item within the district's jurisdiction, and comment on items not listed on today's agenda. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. You may, if you're calling in, I see we have one caller. You will need to push *9 on your end. And if you're participating via Zoom, you'll just need to hit the raise hand feature.
Excellent.
Chair Roberson, I see no one with their hands raised.
All right, then we will close the general public comment. And we do have some participants I've noticed, our attendees, very happy to welcome them to join our discussion as we look at action items. Well, the first action item is to consider adoption of the minutes. And again, we want to be sure if there's any public comment on the minutes. Let's find that out first. Joelle, please.
Yes, at this time, if you have public comment on item number 1, please raise your hand, or if you're calling in, push *9. Chair Roberson, I see no raised hands.
Thank you. So I'll, for the sake of time, I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes.
I second.
And if there's any discussion, additions, deletions, I don't hear any, so we'll do a roll call, please.
Committee Member Riley.
Aye.
Committee Member Anderson. Absent. Chair Roberson.
Aye.
The motion carries on a vote of 2 with 1 member absent.
Okay. Thank you. Moving right along, we'll go to our second action item, and that's to consider recommendation to the Board of Preferred Water Allocation options for the expansion of Montage Health's Bryan Ranch campus. Very interesting report. I'm just very happy that we'll be able to have our incredible general manager explain exactly what these options are that we would refer to the full board, because it's really an interesting discussion, I think, of just the microcosm of water supply, not only for the peninsula, but all over the state. If we continue with our 1200 mega drought, it's going to be very interesting to find out where water is going to come for anything. So with that, we'll turn it over to the district's most appreciated general manager, Dave.
I have a quick question. Could you describe the problem we're trying to solve as well as?
Yeah, and actually the mayor kind of put his finger on it. You know, we've been in water scarcity. I have to go to the glasses for this one. We've been in water scarcity, you know, basically since the early 90s, and Order 9510 in effect defined the fact that we meaning the community, were taking more water than there was a legal right for. And so in the course of the last 3 decades, we've created a very rigid water accounting system that kind of was at the leading edge, because now other entities in the state and nationally also do what's called net blue accounting. And what net blue means is when a project comes across, in order for there to be a building permit issued, there has to be a water permit issued. And our role as the district has been to look at the plans and specifications pre-project and post-project. And if there's an increase in the capacity to use water in the post-project result, then the source of that additional water has to be identified. And that source could be an allocation from the jurisdiction, which in this case is the city of Monterey, and has no water left in its allocation, or very little water left in its allocation. It can come from water credits established on the site, and that can be an on-site credit, which is what the American Tin Cannery is attempting to do with its hotel project. Or it could be an actual credit created by permanent abandonment of a connection to CalAm, or retrofits and so forth. It can be through an entitlement. And so in the case of Malpaso or Sand City Desal, an entitlement was created. Recently, the city of Pacific Grove with its local water project created an entitlement. And typically these are water that, well, in Sand City's case is not charged for, but in other cases, the local project developer created a regime where you can buy an allocation. Pebble Beach was the first entitlement, created all the way back in the early 90s, and then made available for residential customers in the early 2000s. And so you can go out and buy an allocation of water. And then the final one is water credit transfers. That's where you might be able to get a water credit from someone else. That's generally been dead since about 2005, 2006, due to a couple lawsuits. But similar to that is both the entitlement or the water credit transfer, is that there have been alternate producers off the Seaside groundwater basin. So these are former pumpers or current pumpers who are not CalAm or the city of Seaside, who are appropriators, but folks who were able to demonstrate a long-standing pumping right off the Seaside basin. And the way the adjudication decision was written, it actually promoted the concept of transfers of water between an existing pumper and a new use. And it facilitated it by allowing alternate producers to become what are called standard producers. And when you become a standard producer, you're subject to the annual or the triennial step downs under the adjudication decision. And so as Montage was expanding its campus in Ryan Ranch, in 3 separate transactions, it purchased a little over 7 acre-feet of water for the 2 most recent buildings. There's also a building under construction, which will be the permanent site of the Ohana Child and Adolescent Behavioral Center, that had a previous allocation that they kept alive through by keeping the building permit alive. So we're just going to ignore that current construction and focus on the campus that's kind of off of Upper Ragsdale at the top of the hill. So what's happening is it's becoming, first of all, costly to purchase water from alternate producers, but it's also becoming more scarce. The 2 entities that have done so, one was Cypress Investors, LLC. They have, requested anywhere up to, $500,000 per acre foot. And the other was a DBO, which was Don Orozco's real estate development organization, and Don passed a few years ago, and that water is much more challenging to get a hold of, and it's very expensive. And so the public interest and what we're trying to satisfy here is to identify water, preferably at no cost to Montage, that would allow them to move forward with this proposed cancer center. And what you may find interesting is, the CHOMP campus at the top of the hill off the Holman Highway is somewhat spatially limited. And so whenever there's any of these new needs, the primary need at the hospital are beds for patients. And so with the Ryan Ranch campus and a little bit with the Marina building, Montage has been able to move functions off of the CHOMP site in order to expand uses there in that limited footprint. So what we're trying to do here is find the water in an affordable way so that they can begin construction of their basically final building at the Upper Ragsdale campus site. And we went to the Water Demand Committee in May, and then we learned a few new things between then and now. And in May, our proposal was to use an old Ordinance 87 that was adopted in 1997 that created a specific allocation to the CHOMP site. But what we learned as we did more homework was that, in fact, that ordinance was kind of subsumed or overcome by a subsequent policy that was adopted. And in 2003, the district board adopted an overall cap at the CHOMP hospital campus. And that cap was 119.28 acre feet. And that included the Ordinance 87 allocation, 18.28, plus what was identified as the average use at the campus site at that time. And so what Water Demand staff, Stephanie Locke, has done is she has identified the most recent 8+ years, almost 8.5 years of consumption records, and determined that the CHOMP site has averaged only about 83 acre feet per year, which means there's unused capacity under the cap that was established in 2003. So the first proposal is to, in effect, redefine the site for the hospital to include the Ryan Ranch campus and add all of the parcels of both the Holman Highway campus and the Upper Ragsdale campus together in a single site, hospital site definition. And that would be very similar to what we did for institutes of accredited institutes of higher education, which was done probably now about 5 years ago. Similar to what we did for the jurisdictions, we redefined their site as any properties owned by the city. And we did the same for the school districts. And the reason for all of these was that our existing rules at the time would allow moving water credit from one parcel to another if they were contiguous and under common ownership and use. And that seemed to work well for small commercial projects where a developer owned both parcels and they could move the water from one to the other. But it didn't work well for example, cities. We got very creative when the Van Buren housing project was done. We moved water from the old convalescent center through the rights of way through the streets because the streets were owned by the city. So we deemed them all to be contiguous.
Right.
But then after the fact, we said, this is absurd. Let's just define a city site to be all the properties the city owns. Same thing for the schools. When pupils move and population shifts, you never know where your need is going to be. You have to follow the kids. Those are not contiguous properties. And then the same for higher education. We looked specifically at MIS, and they wanted to put in dormitory spaces or living spaces. And they also wanted to move, some campus classrooms and so forth. And those city blocks, it's not always contiguous either. And so the whole idea was to create flexibility. And that's what we're proposing here under option 1, which is just redefine their site, move the Ryan Ranch usage under the existing cap, which would still leave a surplus. Option 2 would be to say, well, instead of redefining site, we can take some of that surplus at the Chomp site, and because the Chomp Hospital site and the Ryan Ranch campus are both within the city of Monterey, it's within one jurisdiction. And so the hospital could do basically a transfer to itself. However, our rules define that the city, the jurisdiction, would have to analyze CEQA. And in the past, we had difficulties with defining the cumulative impact of all potential water transfers within a jurisdiction, which is an absurd framework, but it's been the primary issue that scared away most of the cities, including Pacific Grove several years ago on the Cosentino property, scared them away from attempting to do water transfers. Our thinking right now is if a portion was retired to the benefit of the river, then we could, instead of having to do a full-blown EIR and consider cumulative impacts, we would call that a mitigation and just hopefully do it with a mitigated negative deck and, wait and see if there's any opposition, which I would imagine there wouldn't be, but there could be. And then the third option would be to utilize the district reserve. We contemplated that for the Garden Road affordable housing projects. Then the state weighed in and said, we can't say that we're not going to enforce condition 2 of the cease and desist order. That risk would be the same here, but as I said at the beginning of this meeting, I think before we went public, scrutiny is a little bit less now that one of the individuals at the state is no longer on this project. But nevertheless, it would be much more identifiable as a new allocation that might be subject to condition 2 of the cease and desist order. So I think, in order, I think all three work, but option 1 is very likely the easiest, and it's most consistent with what we've done in the past. And that water was already, the cap was already identified, so it's already basically out there.
Dave, could I in addition to what you've said, there is a means to blur or blend option 3 with option 2. The option 3 is the use of the reserve allocation, but it keeps in mind that the district reserve allocation can be augmented by dedications from a water entitlement, water use credit, or water credit. And therefore, rather than have it be a separate allocation, it could be replenished by an on-site credit. So your existing rule does allow that. So you could use the district reserve and then backfill it from the on-site credit that Chomp has. So
and that way we would avoid it being deemed a true transfer and the jurisdiction having to do CEQA.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
However, the Ryan Ranch campus is not the same as the Monterey campus, so it's not considered a site at this time.
Well, but what your rule, your reserve district use of district reserve says specifically under 33B that the reserve allocation can be augmented by dedications of water from an entitlement or a credit. So
right, but I guess what I'm saying, Dave, is there's no credit on the Ryan Ranch campus that could be used.
understood, but it would be a credit that could be used for the reserve allocation. So I just wanted to point that out. I think it is an option, a tweak of the option 3.
And just as a heads up, we do have the project manager representing as one of our attendees, Mark Brannon. So Mark, if you've got any comment to add, just go ahead and raise your hand and we'll bring you in.
Hey, Dave, I'm here with Brett Silvestri, the Director of Facilities. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. No, we appreciate everything that's being said. If there's any questions for us, we're more than happy to contribute and answer. I think Dave has been very articulate in spelling out what our restrictions are and our limitations by our 16-acre dedication of open space at the main campus has limited our ability to expand the hospital proper, which means we don't have any more beds. And so the purpose of this new facility at Ryan Ranch is to relocate the cancer center, which will transfer the cancer center patients up to Ryan Ranch and then free up that space within the hospital property where we can provide more patient care and create more rooms and beds. So again, if there's any questions for us, we're more than happy to jump in and answer.
Actually, while we have the mayor of Monterey on, maybe we can ask the question, how did the coastal zone get all the way up to the top of the hill on 68?
I was having a discussion recently with one of our council members, a very nice young man, and I had mentioned the name of Henry Mello. And so Henry Mello was, he was the, what do they call him? The Senate pro tem, the leader of the Senate forever in California. That was before term limits. Then Willie Brown was the Speaker of the Assembly forever. And basically between the two of them, they had more power than the governor because nothing came to the governor's desk without siphoning through those two gentlemen. And then when the Coastal Act came into fruition and creation, Henry Mello was one of the key authors and guided it through. And then he would talk to various people. So not only, I don't know how it got up to Skyline, frankly, but then if you look at it, you can see it makes some very interesting curves and meanders along the coastline, including some private property and not others. And you scratch your head and go, well, how did that happen? I'll leave that to your imagination. But that's how it more or less became what it is.
Interesting.
Senator, and there's the, I don't know, I'll put Dave Laredo on the spot. Mello-Roos Act, remember that one?
Yes.
I'm trying to think, would that pertain to something else too? I
that was for Community Facilities District finances.
Right.
Yeah,
all financing.
Right, so when you wanted, you went to talk, you talked to Senator Mello and you talked to Assembly Member Brown when you wanted things done, and they made it happen. So that's how the boundary became what it was. But I just got on the council in 1981 and our LUP had just been adopted. And I really had some serious issues, especially with the floor area ratios and the size of some of the buildings permitted on Cannery Row. Sorry you asked, Dave, on Cannery Row. But at that point, that ship had sailed. And I was also on the council when Ryan Ranch had already just been annexed. Speaking of Ryan Ranch, had just been annexed to the city of Monterey. It was going to be a light industrial park as an alternative to being a heavy tourist economy. And then obviously there's another one where Elvis has left the building, and over the years it's morphed into pretty much health services that I'm very grateful for. But you never know what's going to boogie out there. And one of the conditions I wanted to put on Ryan Ranch was a contribution to the expansion of Highway 68. And that never got into the annexation process. But then again, that all happened just before I got on council. So
your hands are clean.
Well, yeah, pretty well. Yeah. Now about some of that other stuff I did, not so clean.
No, that's great.
You know what, David, if I may, I was at I was at the ribbon cutting for the Monterey Bay Aquarium in 1984 because I had just been elected mayor. I had absolutely nothing to do with it. It had all been previous councils. So I give them a ton of credit for that. So there I am with Julie Packard and the mayor of Pacific Grove. Come on, I can see him. Floris Williams. Yeah. And so we're cutting the ribbon, and in hindsight, I should have had Jerry Fry there, the former mayor, because he really was the one who did all the work. But as I always say, I get credit for things I didn't do, but I also get blamed for things I didn't do. So it all kind of comes out in the wash. Excellent. So anyway, I don't know how Skyline became part of the Coastal Act.
Yeah. But I think the implication pretty much lets us fill in the blanks. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're happy to welcome Amy Anderson, director, to our meeting. And you had your hand up. Hi, Amy.
Yeah, it took me a while to, let's say, three or four attempts, and I got in, and Joelle moved me over. So I can't say why. Who knows about these things? I have a question about the. I guess it's in the option 1 about combining the campuses. Would that include the campus up in Marina? I mean, I know they probably don't use that much water because it's mostly part rehab.
Yeah, we would leave that one out. There's, and this is always the risk. There's, I believe, a building right off of Lower Ragsdale that's administrative or business office. We try to leave that one out. I think we would work with Mark and Brent on whether or not the Ohana Child and Adolescent Behavior Center should be in or not, because it does have its water. But yeah, the concept would be to try to get to just patient serving medical buildings, rather than like billing and administration and that kind of thing.
Okay, well that makes it complicated, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Why not combine them?
Well, we could. That would be the easiest.
So it's
and I think pure office, which would be group 1 use, is very low water intensity. So I think that's something I would just delegate to water demand staff to do some math and then coordinate with Montage. Obviously, Marina is out of our jurisdiction, so we'd leave that out. It would just be a definition for within. But yeah, I don't think it would be harmful. When Stephanie did her search, and maybe Stephanie, you want to weigh in here, you did a quick search. Properties are in the name of Chomp, they're in the name of Montage. I think there's some in the name of Montage Health, some in Montage Medical. So we could redo that survey, or we could work with Montage to identify all the properties and do a quick calculation as to whether it would really matter. That additional 22 acre feet under the cap, that's a lot of water. And I wouldn't foresee that being utilized ever.
Yeah, and I would just suggest that we keep it to the medical buildings because they do own some residential properties. They own some commercial properties that are not currently in a medical type of use. And it would be just cleaner to include both the Ryan Ranch campus area and the Monterey campus area as a single site.
Yeah, that's right. Carl Outson's building off a lighthouse was purchased by Montage and used for visiting nurses and other residential reasons. And so, as that type of acquisition continues, we would be kind of falling behind and trying to keep up with it. But I think it would. And
it would complicate things to try to track track such a cap as properties are added or dispersed. They also have a warehouse that's down across from Monterey Fish House. So there's different properties, and so it would be much cleaner to just keep it all under the medical threshold.
Now, all of this problem goes away if the PUC does the right thing in the next couple of months and approves the expansion of Pure Water Monterey, and we, provide allocations to all the jurisdictions. And for the next hopefully 25 years, water is not an issue anymore, and we don't have to get creative, and the, space under the cap for Chomp or Montage won't really matter at that point. But for right now, we're just trying to leverage it for moving this project forward.
I have one more question. So those, well, maybe one, those small properties that Chomp is buying, those are they just come with the water that was already at that property. So that's not the issue. I was a little concerned about the suggestion that we take from the reserve, because I guess I didn't understand whether that could be, just with the transfer of numbers, that could be not drawn down to a level that would create any kind of concern in the community for, let's say, a need for fire or something to get it. I mean, that it's going the wrong direction to take out of the reserve.
Yeah, it would use up about half the reserve, we estimate. And there's still a little bit of work that needs to be done between Montage and Stephanie's department on, are there any extra intensive uses? So, what we've done before, and I think the staff note had it, was many of these buildings were permitted as group 1 use, basically office space, but occasionally, on a couple of properties, we've noticed that water use is a little higher, and it can be, just like cooling for imaging or water for some therapeutics and so forth. So the work to be done still is to figure out if it's 3.5 acre feet or 4 acre feet or 4.5 acre feet, and that'll just happen, administratively. But it would drain about half of the reserve. Now, we're not going to need the reserve in a couple of years, again, if pure water expansion gets approved.
And Amy, just to clarify that a little bit, the district reserve was created from the savings that Pacific Grove did with their water project. And it is specifically for community benefit projects. So we've had district reserves in the past that barely ever got touched. And in fact, they ended up getting dispersed to all the jurisdictions. But that is really the purpose of the reserve, is to provide water for these types of projects.
Is that touched in, I don't know, let's say if there is a fire, is that ever?
No, that has nothing to do with this. Yeah.
No, it's typically it's set up for permanent construction.
Okay.
So that's why we looked at it for affordable housing.
Yeah.
Because that's a community benefit.
Okay.
I know at one point in the way past, we tried to define what community benefit projects are, and then everyone came out of the woodwork to say, well, mine's for the, like any museum, the aquarium,
daycare centers.
What was that one?
There was a daycare center that got
a daycare center, right? Yeah.
Well,
it's actually important.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If you're a working mother, that could be community benefit.
But when we reestablished the district reserve 5 or 6 years ago, the board retained the discretion to determine what is a community benefit. They didn't want to write down criteria or types of uses.
Yeah.
Through the chair, Stephanie, I want to thank you for adding the comment about some non-medical related properties. That's kind of my question, is the definition, and how consistent can we be with the, either public benefit or community service? Public benefit and community service say two different things to me, and I'm not sure what the language is, but I just want to make sure that, first of all, I like option 1 better. I think it's simpler. It does seem to hold together just theoretically about how you organize yourselves and how you manage and monitor things. And that seems to be a good use of the site definition. That's all I'm saying. But when you get down to the definitions, I just want to make sure we're sticking to the definitions that we have, and we're not stretching the border or the definitions of that. And if the two of you can kind of confirm, or three of you can kind of confirm that the definitions are holding up with option one, I think that's the best way to go forward.
Yeah, I would echo that. Option three on its surface appears to be the simplest, but it does raise the specter of this is, it appears to be new water given, which brings in condition to the cease and desist order. Option two has some CEQA issues that we think you can sidestep pretty adroitly, but option one is all based in old decisions that have already been made, amounts of water that have already been identified and unused. So it's kind of like that happened a long time ago. In fact, it happened before the cease and desist order. So it's just the senior housing thing. You know, it's a prior action that would just be expanded a little bit.
Yeah, it just looks like clearing up the math.
Yeah.
Well,
and it goes to what Mark Brannon said earlier, which is they're just space limited. If they weren't, all of this activity, or I can't say all of it, but much of this activity would have taken place on property they already own, but they can't. And so we're just kind of extending the footprint for what was intended all the way back in 1997.
Well, and then just continuing on the option one and the definition of site, or the including definition of the site. I like the fact that this is a policy that has been in place for a number of years, practiced well before cease and desist order came in. So I like that, and I like the fact to be reminded of just not only this discussion, but be reminded that we were ahead of the curve as a district for setting up allocations anyway to try to manage the available water supply and use. And I just think it's just another, I think another reminder to me that the district has been on the ball here for a long time. And it's good to see. And I want to compliment the mayor too on remembering a lot of that history, and Dave, you too. I'm glad I joined this meeting because I learned a lot from just the history lesson.
Well, hey, yeah, George, when I write my memoirs, you're going to have a whole chapter.
Yeah, let's not compliment us too effusively, because if we'd really been on our game, we would have figured this out before the first building bought water from Cypress Investors LLC.
Yes.
So. Well, what I like about option one is that it stays within current policy, and that's what I like. We're not stretching beyond and inviting maybe litigation and maybe inviting just delays, I'll say, for whatever reason.
Yeah. Great. So I believe
are we ready to get, I'm sorry, Dave, are we ready for public comment at this point? Yeah. Dave, did you want to say something before we went to public comment?
No, I just wanted to clarify. I think what I'm hearing is that when we do take action, we're going to recommend just one of these options, and it's likely to be option one. But we're not there yet with the motion. Okay.
Yes. All right, Joelle, would you invite public comment, please?
Yes, at this time, the committee welcomes public comment on item number 2. Please raise your hand, or if you're calling in, push *9. Chair Roberson, I see no raised hands.
All right, thank you. All right, back to our committee.
I have no additional comments.
All right, are we ready for a motion? George, it sounded like you have a good grasp of this. What would you care to make a motion for us?
Yeah, I have no other further comments. Yeah, I move adoption of option 1 to recommend to the board for action.
I second.
All right, any more discussion under that? And I've just asked the question from our general manager, are we comfortable with that option? It's going to accomplish basically what we want to do.
Yes, and I think that the details will just be how we define hospital site. And I think we'll probably end up using parcel numbers, which we haven't done in the prior site definition changes, but because we're segregating some properties out, we'll probably do it that way.
Okay, good. Well, I think, yes, I really appreciate the directors and our staff for making this understandable to a retired 5th grade teacher. So thank you. Roll call, please, Joelle.
Committee Member Riley?
Aye.
Committee Member Anderson?
Yes.
Chair Roberson?
Yes.
The motion carries on a vote of 3-0.
And for the benefit of our Montage guests, this will go to the full board on July 18th.
Very good.
All right.
All right. So
about memory, Clyde, I wouldn't mind having just, a syringe full of yours. I'll take it.
Oh, very good. Very good. Excellent pun. All right. Now I have to find out. That was so funny. I've lost my spot. And here we go. All right. Discussion item, and that's discuss the CPUC application phase 2 proceeding schedule and materials. Again, back to our general manager, please.
Yeah, and this is just an FYI because the Water Demand Committee has been the committee that's reviewed demand numbers. And so, when we look at water supply planning, it's water supply and water demand. And water supply is there to procure the water that's needed, and the water that's needed is determined based on water demand. And so this will come back to this committee at some point. But I just wanted to give you a flavor for where we're at. The current application in front of the Public Utilities Commission had 2 phases. Phase 1 was to consider the water purchase agreement amendments for the expansion of Pure Water Monterey. That has in effect closed. The final reply briefs and a few other motions to strike and answers to the motions to strike have all been submitted. And so now we're just waiting on the administrative law judge to issue a proposed decision, which she's committed to do by roughly September 20th. We're hopeful that it's quite a bit before that. The second phase is what the PUC said in their scoping memo back in February was, well, we're still very interested on long-term supply and demand numbers in order to determine whether a desal plant is really needed or not. And then what they did was issue a new schedule June, I think, let me look at this, June 17th. And that's what's included as Exhibit A to this item. And so basically, Cal-Am will submit testimony on July 20th, and then we will answer by August 19th. And so during that period, we will be developing both rebuttals to Cal-Am's assumptions, as well as kind of a straightforward relooking at our own supply and demand study. The 2 key issues that are likely to come up are on the supply side, it's going to be drought resilience of things like aquifer storage and recovery and Pure Water Monterey. And on the demand side, it's going to be the same old issues, the RHNA numbers reflecting housing. Our contention is there was so much water put into the project sizing for legal lots of record that water, almost 1,200 acre feet, more than covers the RHNA numbers. And that's where you build housing, on legal lots of record, which include both vacant lots and underutilized lots, and lots that could be subdivided into tiny home lots, like in Pacific Grove, or lots that can be upzoned or have already been upzoned, that are developed but have additional capacity. So we'll be focused on how We can address the RHNA numbers and whether there's any incremental impact on our previous supply and demand study. One of the disadvantages we'll have at this point is AMBAG has not updated their long-term growth forecast, which usually is a good third-party tool to be used. And that was what was in our assumptions for the last adopted water supply and demand study, and then was reviewed by an outside consultant paid for by Marina Coast Water District and in effect validated. So anyway, we're not at the point where we're going to reveal any of our proposals at this point in time, because it's best to see what goes into the CalAM testimony due July 20th. But we will be focused quite a bit on that work. And I think this committee is not going to meet again until early September, if I'm doing my math right. So if you feel the need for a meeting to review the testimony, then we would want to schedule a special opportunity for you to look at, our proposed testimony. So that's all that's all I have.
If I could just layering on that, CalAM in their presentation for phase 1 did give very varied and many comments that need to be addressed by us in testimony. They make comments about ASR, about pure water. They question about sufficiency for drought, reliability, and we've been carefully tabulating these as we go along. So that's going to be a template for issues that need to be raised in our testimony for phase 2.
Yes, Director George.
I want to tie in the general rate case that CalAM filed, I don't know, 2 years ago or so, where they admitted that their supply or demand numbers was consistent, Dave, with your report. And I'm just a little disturbed by how CalAM can argue one side of the argument in one venue and another side of the argument in another venue, and yet it's the same venue. And how do they do that?
Yeah, you're spot on. We do have the advantage that their next general rate case is being filed pretty much as we speak. It has a case number, an application number, and all of the minimum data requirements have already been filed, at least in draft form, but I think they're now deemed to be final. And then testimony is being filed. They do that, July of every third year. And so we're spot on, right on top. So we'll be able to see what's in their current rate case as well. As you know, water supply planning is how much do we use today? How much will we need in the future? And how fast are we going to get there? And back when this whole dispute began, right around when the Coastal Commission hearing was happening for DCEL, when we got a little bit smarter at looking at the assumptions, we were in disagreement about how much water was being used today at that time by almost 2,500 acre feet. And you're right. Then when they came into the rate case, lo and behold, their forecast of where we were today and where we would be in the test year, meaning the rate case year out, 3 years from that filing, was pretty much spot on our numbers. And so they conceded that piece of the 3 elements. I think we've conceded the third piece, which is how much water are we going to need in the future, because that growth could happen. It could take 30 years, it could take 50 years. And I think the dispute was how fast is it going to happen? And we clearly disagreed with their assumptions. And so what was going on when the DCEL plant was sized was they started with a mistaken assumption about how much do we use today. And then they assumed that all of the future use is needed tomorrow. you know, basically that was the size of the plant. Was we're going to get there and we're going to get there quick, and this is our one shot to build it. Let's build everything we need. And what it means to the community, if you don't grow that fast and you're going to have measured growth, it means the large capital cost of a massive project falls to the current residents, and you don't have enough new residents coming in next year and the year after and the year after to take up their fair share of the capacity that was built on behalf of future growth. And that's, it's a real fundamental important issue that you can't take lightly. You shouldn't ask current ratepayers to overpay for something that's not needed. And so the dispute was, when is it really needed? How soon is it needed? And, you know, in California, we like to say it takes 10 years to build anything. So you certainly need to look 10 years out. And if you need it in the 10th year, you should be building it today. But all of the numbers that we had showed you might not need it for 35 years. And so, you know, we said, well, if we're wrong about the growth rate, or if there's a pent up demand and suddenly a bunch of projects get permitted once the cease and desist order is lifted, well, if we're wrong, if we think it's 35 years and we're a little wrong and it's really 25 years, well, then we don't need to make the next decision until 15 years from now. And do we have an alternative that gets us at least 15 years of water? And the answer, of course, was yes. And so we're going through that same exercise again. As you know, or you've probably already seen, it looks like the expansion has been supported by all testimony. So ours and Cal-Am's, it's always a little Jekyll and Hyde in Cal-Am's testimony. So we're expecting the expansion to be approved. But my suspicions are that the company will say, yeah, well, that's all nice and good, but it's not enough. It's not enough for the future. It's not enough for protective water levels on the Seaside Basin. ASR is not drought resilient. Pure Water Monterey has source water problems. You know, all of that stuff is going to come out again to say there's just too much uncertainty. And then there's peak demand issues. And that's why, you know, we need a desal plant and we need it soon. That's where I think it's going to go. I think that's what Dave and Fran have read into some of the things that we've been seeing to date. And certainly, Director Riley, you've seen it while sitting on the Water Master board. So that's the direction. That's where we think it's going to get steered with this phase 2.
Well, and the other question I had is AMBAG's study of or report on general growth projections. Is there a prognosis on when that might happen?
Yeah, no, we have no idea. I think they're so absorbed with RHNA, keeping in mind that the RHNA numbers that everyone's freaking out over now are still draft. And so there's been a lot of back and forth and conversation among the jurisdictions and AMBAG and the state. So I think they're preoccupied right now. So I don't know when we'll see a growth forecast.
I just one last question on the PUC piece of this. Who are the actual parties that will be participating as opposed to those who are not parties but filed briefs? I mean, does everybody participate, or is there?
It'll be the same set of participants for phase 1. There's not a separate open window for people to participate.
Right, and so that's Cal-Am, the district, Monterey One Water, Marina Coast Water District, and Public Water Now, I think.
And the Office of Ratepayer Advocates, new name, staff.
Yeah.
Does that mean the Coalition of Peninsula Businesses and Landwatch will not be participating in the next cycle?
Oh, I believe the Peninsula Businesses are in.
Yes.
Yeah, Landwatch, did they file for it?
Yes, they did.
Okay. Yeah, good call. Yep, and that's it. That's your parties.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Robertson?
Yeah, I was muted, thanks. If it's not, it was my rat terrier again. There she is. She likes to chime in our discussions. So let's find out, Joelle, if there's any public input. Again, there's no action being taken, simply a discussion item. We'll open it up, please.
So if you would like to make public comment on item number 3, please raise your hand, or if you're calling in, press *9. Chair Roberson, I see no raised hands.
All right, thank you. We'll close that public participation part of our agenda then, and we will move on. Thanks for the update, Dave. It's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. As I sit here, I always think, why can't these folks just stop litigating and get us a water supply? Stop it already. Yeah. Oh, well. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so any suggested items to be placed on future agendas?
Discussion of what just happened. We got to keep that up. So we know what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good public information. All right, then I think seeing that, I think we're ready to adjourn. I didn't leave anything out, which I'm apt to do. As always, I always learn a lot from you all. So thank you, our incredible staff of the Water District, directors. And although we had no public input, I always value that when we do. So we'll see you all tomorrow morning at